Hello, everyone. Hey, this is Rolf from Waves and Positions, and we're back with a really cool new article. So this is working out really good with these backgrounds. I'm actually wearing this Fortinaire hat today that you might have seen on Bob in another episode, and I'm wearing this kind of cool X-Men shirt with Wolverine. And just to let you know how to age myself, I actually, when I was in about 7th or 8th grade, I actually bought this comic and got Jim Lee to sign it. So if you do some math on that, you can probably figure out what my age is. But anyways, we are going to talk about some special guys today, and it's part of what America's about. It's what our founding fathers are about. And I'll just take it away here for a minute. So if you see what I got here, it's twice offered absolute power, twice gave it back. Now, the title of this article at my Waves and Positions Substack is called The Men Who Gave It Back. Now, America was not made great by men who seized power. It was made great by men who held power and chose to return it. Every future president should know their names. Okay, the most important moment in the history of American democracy happened in a field. In my picture, this field. Not on a battlefield, not in a legislature, not in a courtroom or a constitutional convention. In a field beside a plow on a small farm across the Tiber River from Rome in the year 460 BC. A man named Lucius Quincidus Cincinnatus was working his land when a delegation from the Roman Senate arrived. They asked him to put on his toga to receive them formally. His wife fetched it from inside. The senators informed him that Rome was in a crisis. An enemy army had surrounded and trapped a Roman force, and the Senate had voted to appoint a dictator with absolute emergency power over the entire state. They had chosen him, Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus left his plow in the field. He went to Rome. He took command, organized the army, defeated the enemy in 15 days, liberated the trapped Roman force, then immediately resigned his commission, his dictatorship, and went back to his farm. He had been handed absolute power over the most powerful state in the Western world. He used it precisely as long as the emergency required. Then he gave it back. The act, a farmer returning to his field when he could have kept the throne, became the foundation on which America's greatness was eventually built. The farmer who did it twice, remember? Did it twice. What makes Cincinnatus extraordinary is not just that he gave the power back once, he did it twice. Again, in 439 BC, when Cincinnatus was approximately 80 years old, Rome faced another crisis. A man named Spurius Maelius was accused of attempting to make himself king by distributing grain to the poor to build a popular following. The Senate again voted to appoint a dictator. They again chose Cincinnatus. He again took power. He again dealt with the crisis. He again resigned voluntarily and returned to his farm. Twice offered absolute power over Rome, twice walked away from it. The Romans told this story for 500 years. It became the standard against which every Roman leader was measured, and almost all of them fell short. The ideal was not the conquest not the triumph, not the accumulation of power. The ideal was the voluntary return to civilian life, the proof that the man was serving Rome rather than using Rome to serve himself. Cincinnatus understood something that the most dangerous leaders in history have never understood. The value of power in a republic comes precisely from its temporary nature and its willing surrender. The moment a leader begins to think about keeping power rather than using it, the republic begins to die. He planted that idea in the Western political tradition, and 2,500 years ago. So he planted that idea in the Western political tradition 2,500 years ago. It took another 2,000 years for a group of men in Philadelphia to build a government around it. Washington and the moment that stunned the world. Fast forward, December 23rd, 1783, Annapolis, Maryland. The Revolutionary War is over. The British have surrendered. George Washington, the commanding general of the Continental Army, the most celebrated man in the new nation, the figure around whom an entire revolution had coalesced, walks into the Maryland State House to address the Continental Congress. He resigns his commission. He hands back his authority, thanks Congress for its support, and announces his intention to return to his farm at Mount Vernon. The war is over. The emergency is past. The power goes back. The reaction across the Atlantic was disbelief. King George III, when told that Washington planned to resign his command and return to private life, reportedly said that if he did that, he would be the greatest man in the world. European observers generally could not process it. In their experience, men with armies did not voluntarily give up power. They used armies to take more of it. Washington had read his Plutarch. He knew exactly who Cincinnatus was and considered the Roman farmer's example the model for what Republican leadership required. The parallel was immediate and explicit. American commentators made the comparison the moment Washington resigned. Here was the American Cincinnatus. Here was the proof that the new republic was built on something different from the empires and the kingdoms of the old world. But Washington did not stop there. He wanted the tradition to outlast him. He wanted to institutionalize the Cincinnatus ideal in American life. The order Washington founded and the city it named. In 1783, the same year he resigned his commission, Washington founded the Society of the Cincinnati. It was an organization of officers of the Continental Army and their descendants, a fraternal order to preserve the bond of the men who fought together for independence. He named it after Cincinnatus, deliberately and explicitly. The name was a statement of values. These were men who had served when the Republic needed them and returned to civil life when the service was done. Soldiers who understood that the Republic they had fought to create was more important than any individual claim to power or reward. The society still exists today, making it one of the oldest hereditary organizations in the United States. And just 5 years later, in 1788, a new city was being established on the banks of the Ohio River at the edge of the American frontier. Arthur St. Clair, the first governor of the Northwest Territory and a Revolutionary War general and member of the Society of the Cincinnati, named it Cincinnati. Think about that. Think about what that act meant. On the western edge of the new republic, at the boundary between settled civilization and wilderness, the founders planted a Roman name as a statement of what this experiment was about. Not conquest, not the accumulation of territory and power, the Cincinnatus ideal. Service, restraint, and the willing return to civilian life. A Roman farmer's example carried from a field beside the Tiber in 460 BC across 2,000 years of Western history to a frontier town in Ohio in 1788, inscribed permanently into the American map. Today, over 300,000 people live in Cincinnati, Ohio. Most of them have no idea their city is named after one of the most important ideas in the history of democratic governance. Grant and the third term he could have taken. Ulysses S. Grant is one of the most underappreciated figures in American history. He won the Civil War, not through brilliant maneuvers or theatrical heroics, though he was capable of both, but through something rare and more important. He understood that the war was a logistical and strategic problem of enormous complexity, and he solved it with relentless, patient, systematic pressure while holding the Union coalition together under conditions that would have broken lesser men. By the time the war ended in 1865, he was the most celebrated man in America, the savior of the Union, more popular than Lincoln had ever been in his own lifetime, the kind of figure around whom a nation projects its deepest gratitude and relief. He served 2 terms as president from 1869 to 1877. His administration had real failures, corruption scandals he was too trusting to prevent, Reconstruction policies that ultimately did not hold. History has been uneven in its judgment of him as a president, even as it has increasingly recognized his greatness as a general and as a man. But here's what matters for this story. In 1888, after sitting out 1 term, there was a serious and sustained effort to give Grant a 3rd term. He was still enormously popular. The Republican Party was divided. His supporters at the convention pushed hard. Through multiple ballots, the 3rd term was genuinely available to him. He did not pursue it. He declined to campaign for it. He let it go. Washington had established the 2-term tradition by example in 1796 when he declined to seek a 3rd term. Grant honored that tradition when he could have broken it. The Cincinnatus thread held. The man who could have taken more chose not to. Grant spent his final years dying of throat cancer and racing to finish his memoirs so his family would not be left destitute after his death. He completed them 4 days before he died. They became one of the greatest memoirs in American literary history and provided financially for his family as he had hoped. Even at the end, the work was in service of others rather than himself. Marshall and the pinnacle of tradition. Now, this is a guy, you've probably heard his name from the Marshall Plan if you know anything about World War II, but wow, here we go. Marshall and the pinnacle of tradition. George C. Marshall is one of the 20th century's fullest expressions of Cincinnatus ideal, and he's not famous enough for it. When Marshall became Army Chief of Staff in 1939, the United States Army was smaller than Portugal's. He built it into an 8 million man force, capable of fighting a 2-ocean war simultaneously. He selected the commanders, Eisenhower, Patton, Bradley, and dozens of others with a systematic rigor that put the right people in the right positions at the right moment. He coordinated the Allied war effort across 2 theaters and multiple nations. Churchill called him the organizer of victory. He received his 5th star, General of the Army, in December 1944, the first of only 5 men in American history ever to hold that rank. He was at the absolute apex of American military power. He could have been president, not theoretically, actually. The Republican Party wanted him. The Democratic Party wanted him. Truman would have stepped aside for him. The polls showed he would have won in a landslide. He had more genuine authority and public trust than any American since Washington. He refused every time, completely, without hesitation. Marshall believed with absolute conviction that the moment a military officer began thinking about personal, political advancement was the moment he became useless. as a commander and dangerous as a public figure. He had watched what happened in Europe when that line dissolved. He had seen what politically ambitious generals produced. He wanted no part of it. Instead, he became Secretary of State under Truman and proposed the European Recovery Act, the European Recovery Program, which rebuilt the shattered economies of Western Europe and became known as the Marshall Plan. $13 billion, the equivalent of roughly $150 billion today, that prevented communist movements from filling the vacuum left by World War II devastation and secured Western Europe for the next 70 years. I mean, think about it. For 5,000 years, the armies of everybody, the Romans, the Greeks, everybody just going back and forth. And this guy set it up so that none of the countries in Europe could fight a war by themselves. They came up with this idea where they would break up all the means of production, where they had to work together. He's the only military officer ever awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. The man who built the army that won the war won the Peace Prize for rebuilding the continent the army had fought across. When Truman called him back as Secretary of Defense during the Korean War, he served again. Because the Republic needed him, because that was what the tradition required. When Senator Joseph McCarthy called Marshall a traitor on the Senate floor during the Red Scare, the man who had literally built the army that defeated Hitler and Imperial Japan absorbed the slander without retaliating. His dignity in the face of that grotesque accusation was itself a final act of service. He would not use his authority and popularity to crush a senator, even who deserved it, because that was not what the tradition permitted. He went back to his farm, metaphorically speaking. The plow went back in the field. What these men shared, Cincinnatus, Washington, Grant, Marshall, separated by centuries and continents, connected by a single understanding that most powerful men in history have never reached. The Republic is larger than any individual. Power is borrowed, not owned. The measure of a great leader is not how much power he accumulates, but how cleanly he returns it when the service is done. The willingness to give it back is not weakness. It is the supreme expression of strength. The proof that the man was always serving something larger than himself. This is not a common quality. History is overwhelmingly populated by men who took power and held it until it was taken from them by force or death. The Caesars, who crossed the Rubicon and never looked back. The Napoleons, who turned republics into empires. The strongmen who discovered that elections were useful tools when they were winning and dangerous inconveniences when they were not. The Cincinnatus tradition is the exception, not the rule, which is precisely why it needs to be named, honored, and actively taught to every person who aspires to lead a democratic nation. Washington understood this so clearly that he founded an order to preserve it, and a city was named to honor it. The founders built a constitution around the assumption that leaders of Cincinnatus's character would periodically emerge to fill its offices. They were right that the character was possible. History has shown repeatedly that it is also rare. The invitation to future leaders. This article is not a warning. It is an invitation. The tradition of Cincinnatus is available to every person who holds public office in a democratic nation. It requires no special talent, no military genius, no extraordinary intelligence. It requires one thing only, the genuine belief that the office exists to serve the people rather than the other way around. The greatest Americans in history understood that the presidency, the generalship, the cabinet position was borrowed from the Republic for a specific period and a specific purpose. When the period ended and the purpose was fulfilled, you gave it back. You returned to the farm. You wrote your memoirs, you went home. That act of return is not the end of greatness. It is the proof of it. Washington's resignation was more powerful than any battle he won. Marshall's refusal of the presidency was more important than any campaign he commanded. Grant's honoring of the two terms tradition in 1880 quietly preserved something that could easily have been lost. The city of Cincinnati sits on the Ohio River today, named for a Roman farmer who plowed his field and went back to it, carrying inside that name the oldest and most important lesson in the history of democratic governance. Power is not the prize, service is, and the willingness to end the service when it is done, to hand back what was never really yours to keep, is what separates the men history calls great from the men history calls cautionary tales. Every person who seeks a high office in a democracy inherits this tradition, whether they know it or not. The question is simply whether they will honor it. Cincinnatus went back to his plow. Washington went back to Mount Vernon. Grant went back to writing. Marshall went back to Leesburg, Virginia, and his roses. The Republic endured because they did. A final note. If you're reading this and you hold public office, or you aspire to, or you know someone who does, share this article, not as a political statement, as a reminder of what the tradition actually is and where it came from. Founders were not naive. The founders were not naive about, the founders were not naive about human nature. They knew that power corrupts and that ambitious men would always test the boundaries of what the Republic permitted. They built institutions to constrain that tendency. But they also knew that institutions alone are not enough. The spirit behind the institution matters as much as the letter of them. The spirit has a name. It is Cincinnatus. It lives in the city. It lives in the name of a city on the Ohio River. It lives in the memory of a general who resigned his commission and went home. It lives every time a leader chooses the Republic over themselves. It is available right now to anyone willing to claim it. So thanks for, if you stayed to the end, appreciate it. That was kind of a long one. But again, I'm Rolf from Waves and Positions. Check out my Substack, where there's approximately 200 articles about all kinds of different things that are interesting. So go check it out and send me some comments. I'd love to get some feedback. Let me know what you like. And if anybody has an idea for an article too, I'd love for you to give me an idea and I'll research it and we'll see if it makes it into the videos. So thank you so much. And I'll see you on the next one.